When did writing become a part of your world? How did it start for you?
Actually, it started very young for me, even though as a published author, I think I came into the sphere later in my life, like in my 40s is when my first book came out. But I was 9 years old, and I was in a classroom in Midwestern America, in Minnesota. And our teacher was teaching us a unit in poetry. And it was springtime, and Minnesota has very, very harsh winters, and it's very cold. So the joy of spring was something really, palpable. We used to wait for the ice to melt, for the water to start dripping from the bare boughs on trees, right? So our teacher had said, write a poem about spring. And I think I was in third grade, third standard at the time. And I still remember the poem. Yeah, because it was a very simple one. But I'd written, in spring, everything is born, baby trees, baby plants, and of course, mosquitoes and ants. So, you know, but what I realized is that at the time that this form of writing is like a window, right? And you can frame your experience, your hopes, your desires, even your anxieties, or even, it could be a playground to explore. So at that age, it struck me what a wonderful form this was, because you could really compact your emotions into this little space. And so after that, there was no turning back, basically. Then I explored like a lot of children's poetry. I really liked Shel Silverstein and other children's writers as well. And then it graduated from there. Then my mom gifted me a book by Khalil Gibran, The Prophet. And I was still very young. I think I must have been around 10 or something like that. And I opened it, and it was so beautiful and so mystical. And he talked about this voyage. He talked about different ways of how one could approach life. And I thought, well, what a beautiful way to like talk about all of these things. And so then it just, went forward from there. So I was always interested in writing, always engaged in writing. As a person who is an immigrant, and being one of the only brown people in my whole school, right? Um, I felt like, okay, this is something that is mine, something which I can hold, something which I can express myself in, something that I don't have to tell anyone about. Hey, this is something special, right? Because otherwise, just me looking different was something, that I had to carry with me every single day and negotiate that. But instead of having to negotiate the outer world, this is how I could process my inner world. So it started very young, and it's just a part of me. I never thought of it as a career. I never thought of it as a hobby. It's just who I am. And I know it might sound a little bit, stereotypical or kishy or whatever, but it to me is writing is like breathing to me. It really is. I can't see myself without it. Yeah.
Wow. So, how does the writer you feel? Do you feel the same way in your heart as you did when you in your younger years? And are those motivations the same as they were earlier?
Yes and no. So that spark of creating, it's always there, that joy. I'm happiest always when I'm creating. I mean, once you have the product, you have to relinquish it and send it out into the world, and then it'll get interpreted in many different ways. But I feel when you're younger, right, it's more about yourself. You're negotiating the world, you're discovering who you are. So whatever you write is about how you feel, how you see things. But as you get older, I feel that you realize that, we are part of this global village where all of us are somehow connected. And that might sound idealistic, but we are. And I feel like technology, the internet, the way you and I are talking, you're in India, I'm here in California, but we're still reaching out to each other, right? So in that sense, there's this universality that comes through. At least for me, I feel that whatever I write, it's not just about myself. It's about connecting and reaching out to others. So I am quite conscious of that in my work. but not without relinquishing, you know, specificity. So I really believe in being specific and looking the environment you're in, but also connecting with someone else who might say, ah, yes, I feel the same way. I've experienced the same thing. How does she know that? Or then you feel a kinship in knowing that you're not alone, right? So I think my writing has changed in that way, definitely. I mean, I partially grew up here. So a little bit about myself. I was born in England. I grew up in Midwestern India, but then I also studied in Delhi and Rajasthan for my high school. And then as an adult also, I lived in India for 7 years. My family is originally from Uttarakhand and Uttar Pradesh, but, you know, I'm from all over. Right now, I guess I'm Californian, you know,
Lovely.
somebody who thinks about multiple identities, multiple experiences, and how to, you know, how to show that and emulate that in my writing, you know. So you evolve with experience, you evolve with circumstance, but yeah, I definitely feel like it's not just about myself. Yeah.
Think with AI replace that, is that something which breaks a writer's connect with the reader?
So I just want to say I live in the hotbed of AI. I'm in Silicon Valley, literally. So I'm surrounded by AI everywhere. And you know, I know so many people in my life, they're all working in AI. So, you know, and it's very contentious in some ways because there are people who love it. My children hate it, absolutely, and they want to have nothing to do with it, even though they're from, you know, the latest generation, right? So it's very interesting to see all these polarizing views. As far as using AI for creativity is concerned, I don't think AI can and should replace the originality that comes with writing something on your own. You know, whether it's all those rough edges, whether it's a certain style, because these are all learning language models that are being fed different texts constantly. It is not going to have its own voice. It's going to be an amalgamation of God knows how many millions and millions of voices and texts, right? Which in itself is unfair. And fine, people can argue it's a learning machine. How else is it going to learn? But the thing is, like the internet, people thought it was evil, but here we are using the internet today, right? I The question of ethics comes in, right? And there's a very fine line, right? And what is moral, what is not moral, what is ethical, what is not ethical, who gets the right to police all of these things. So to me, it's a big tangled web. So I don't know how to answer this question except to say that if you call yourself a writer in the creative space, I think it's absolutely horrible to use AI for any type of writing. Can it help us, like maybe edit or for typos? Yes, but then you're also giving the machine your work. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. I don't know how it's going to evolve, but it's, you know, I appreciate some of the things it is doing, but at the same time, you know, the environmental impact, you know, the way it's replacing jobs for so many people. I don't think you can ever replace the human mind or the human touch or that spark of human creativity. So it's scary. It is. It's like, you know, it's like one of those sci-fi movies coming to life in many ways. But I don't want to kick it to the curb either. But when it comes to creativity, absolutely, I don't think it can replace it. I don't think it should replace it. I don't want all these lazy brains, you know, in our society. I think it sort of kills that spark. I can't imagine, you know, saying to an AI platform, write a poem for me about summer. You know, I mean, it'll write something decent, but what is your experience? How does that strawberry taste in your mouth? Like, you know, I mean, when you're watching little kids dip their toes in the ocean, right? Things like that. You know, that visceral experience just won't be there, in my opinion. Yeah. So, but still, it's interesting to see it all around me. It's like literally like, you know, it's almost like I'm breathing AI because I live in Silicon Valley. So, yeah, but that's a great question. It's a wonderful question.
So, what would you say are the struggles that a writer, would come across, because it's there in front of you, you have access to it. So, how do you break that from your process of writing? Like, do you seclude yourself from it? Do you accept parts of it, like feed certain ideas or get certain ideas from it? How does it happen?
Uh, so I I do a lot of stuff on my phone. So here's the thing. I think, we don't realize how entrenched we are in AI because now Google has an AI component to it. If you even do a search on Google, an AI summary will come through, right? Even other technologies, other, like, things we might use, even Microsoft Word, even, Google Drive, all these things, they all have AI built into it. And, our medical systems where things are, electronic, all of this is going to have that. So I think it's going to be very difficult to avoid unless you relinquish technology altogether. But our our smartphone has become so powerful, and like a lot of times I will jot down notes in my phone. I will search for things in my phone. I will read books on my phone. And this reliance that we have because it's convenient, right? uh, it is dangerous. I'm aware of it even as I'm using it. So um, the thing is, though, because there's so many platforms and ways to you know make things easier for us, I think we ultimately are going to have to draw the line, as to what is good enough for us, what do we really need help with, and what can we do on our own. For example, I love doing research. The last book I wrote, Anandibai Joshi, A Life in Poems, I did a lot of research, and the internet was so helpful because I could access electronic archives. There were books that I found that were in electronic form. So in that sense, it's a blessing. Otherwise, I don't know how I could have accessed any of these things, right? Um, but also, like, I am one of those people who loves going to the library. And I come from that era where they had card catalogs, where you had to, like, go through these listings that were printed on cards and then go and find your book. And then, you're in these aisles full of books. You can smell the books, you could smell the paper, you could smell the dust, right? I love that tactile experience. And so, I am one of those people who will go and seek those tactile experiences. But in this digital age, many people don't do that. So I think one sort of has to go by, what they need, what they want, and how they want to get it. How much effort do they want to put into it? Um, a lot of people now read ebooks, right? And it's very convenient because there are many books that come out in India that don't come out in the US, which I'm able to buy through Kindle, right? Or other platforms. So I enjoy that convenience, but at the same time, I like also putting in the effort. And so I feel like for everybody, it's different. For myself, I like reading physical books. I'm going to go and get that physical book. I'm going to go to the library. And what happens is, so for example, you can do a search electronically and it'll give you a list. But if you go to the library and go to that area where that subject is, there are a bunch of books which you haven't seen online, but you'll see the titles there and you'll say, wait a minute, this looks really interesting. Oh, I've never heard of this book before. And, sometimes an electronic search won't render that, right? So it's a tough question in some ways, but I think each person has to go with, what works for them. I mean, I won't like think a person is lazy if they you know, taken the help of AI to write an email. There's a lot of drudgery involved in writing. It's not just about the creative work, it's also emails you need to exchange. It's also like, they want a synopsis for your novel or they want a synopsis for your memoir or something like that. There's a lot of boring work. If an author, and also, oh, I want to say one more thing. It's also very solitary work. Very, very solitary work. So sometimes I've had discussions with my friends about this. Like, they want feedback. They'll either get feedback in a week or a month, or who knows how long it'll take somebody to get back to them. With AI, you can get feedback immediately. So, it's one of those things. And that's why community matters so much, because if you have community, then you don't have to rely on a machine. So I think that's the crux of it. If you have
Okay,
community.
that's intrusion of AI into that space. Do you think that in itself also somewhere manipulates the writer? the access to over information and being led on to think a few steps ahead. Do you think that changes the course of how that work takes form?
It can if all you're relying on are, so, I mean, when I wrote Anandi by AI in its current form did not exist. It was simply the internet. And, I relied on archives that were available, some of the things, not everything, but archives that were on the internet, which presented me with a book that was written in the 19th century. So, it's interesting that I was using this modern technology to discover a book written in the 19th century, right? But I it depends. I think you'd have to have a very, very narrow vision to be doing something creative and only get access electronically. But on the other hand, if there's somebody somewhere where the only way they can access information is electronically, then for them it's like having a library inside the, access to a library from their computer. So it's very subjective. It depends on your experience. It depends what type of resources you have, right? But I mean, I'm privileged, right? I live in a place where, Stanford Library is right next to me. Berkeley Library is maybe, 50 minutes away. And then of course I'm surrounded by bookstores. I'm surrounded by public libraries. So I have all of these options, right? Whereas somebody else might not have that, and they might have to be reliant on what's accessible through the computer. So I think it really depends upon how the human mind processes all the information that they get. We're biased by everything. I mean, there's confirmation bias, there's bias through, even when you watch the news, even when you interact with media, what your friends have told you, what your parents have told you, right? So there's no way to avoid bias. How that affects our writing depends on whether you're reliant on just one type of information. I think a good writer or a good researcher will try to look at things from all angles. So hopefully it's not going to, turn writing into a certain type of writing. But that happens with writing schools as well. Like there's often talk amongst people in my writing community here. Oh, so-and-so did a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from that school, and everybody's writing is sort of like this. So, you can get that type of style or that type of bent towards a certain thing from anywhere. Yeah. So I wouldn't exactly say that AI will do that. Can it create a certain type of writing? Absolutely. Can one recognize if something has been written with AI? Yes, to a certain extent one can. Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. It definitely is. Yeah.
Like perspective on it, and what responsibility do authors in today's time have when it comes to giving voice to lives that have been forgotten or silenced, keeping in view the times that we are in? Like, how? What would you have to say about that?
Well, I want to, especially, I guess in my case, I focused on women's voices. And I feel like there are never enough women's voices or women's experiences written in history. History has always been very patriarchal. Our society has always been very patriarchal. So if anybody is bringing out a woman's voice, hats off to them. Uh, I don't think history or biography can be, neutral. It never can be. It's always going to have some sort of bias from the person who's writing it, from the person who's reading it, the type of information you're getting. Everything will have some sort of influence, right? But in terms of why one should do it, it's because where we are in the present right now is often determined by what has happened in the past. And if we want to be inspired, if we want to recognize patterns, if we want to find solutions, I think it's very important to look at the past. We live in a generation right now, in a time where everything is instant gratification. We don't realize how hard people from the past had to work, had to fight in order for us to enjoy or have access to what we have today. So I think for that reason alone, it is so important to bring these voices. I mean, Anandi Bai, she did come from a privileged Brahmin family, so to speak, even though they were not rich or anything by any means. But for a woman to be in a home where women didn't wear shoes because they didn't need to, because they didn't step out of the house, for her to dare to step out of the chokar, to go out of her house, to wear shoes, to go to school, to be ridiculed, to be made fun of, to be spit on, but still to be so determined to get an education. Can you imagine at that time? The type it created so much fear, but it also created so much inspiration. And then imagine to sail all alone on a ship. And in those days, ships capsized. You didn't know what was going to happen, right? I mean, uh, she sailed all alone from Calcutta all the way to New York and arrived there safely in a country where she didn't know a soul except this family through letters, right? A different culture, different food, different weather, all of these things. And she managed to not only get along with everybody, she managed to impress everybody and get an education there as well. I mean, it's mind blowing, in the 19th century, in 1883. Um, and so when I started researching her, it was because the narrative here is often that oh, I came here because my family moved here, or one generation ago my grandparents came here, or something like that. There was never a history beyond 1 or 2 decades, but I knew that people had come before, but there was no history. There's no history book we could look at. There was no narrative we could like find. I mean, everything was in bits and pieces. So when I discovered who she was, I was so shocked that I didn't know who she was. I was so shocked that other people didn't know who she was. And then when I read her story, I was just blown away at all the obstacles she had to conquer in order to get an education, in order to be heard, in order for her to come here, get an education, and go back. And though she died at 21 without being able to practice as a doctor, she cleared the path for other women to come through, and that in itself is such an important thing. So when I discovered the story, I said, I can't keep this story to myself. Everyone has to know about her. And in Maharashtra, people do know about her, but even out of Maharashtra, women didn't really know about her. Other people didn't know. Even to this day, I'm actually doing an event next week um, talking about Anandi Bai. And the organizers, one of the organizers was like, I didn't know about her. And I talked to other women and they didn't know about her. So it still blows my mind how we are living here as South Asian Americans, and she's part of our history and nobody knows about her, you know? So I think that's why it's important. I think we can learn so much from voices of the past, women from the past. And we need icons. And if we can't find proper icons in the present, we should grab them from the past. Yeah.
History often misses out on certain voices.
Yes.
What do you think about poetry? Do you think poetry uh, can moves away from often understood as being about personal thoughts, but in fact it can actually help bring out narratives from the past and put it out there in a more easily accessible way? Like, do you think that that's something that poetry does?
Absolutely. So, one of the biggest compliments I received, and I mean, this book is so special to me, is one of the compliments that I received was that it seems like Anandi Bai is talking to us. After they've read the book, that's what they tell me. And that's because I feel she spoke to me and she spoke through me, right? And, you know, you might be able to capture that through prose, but if you're writing a novel and you'll have dialogue, but then you have to write the scenery, you have to set up the scene. Here you can immediately just start off with the voice, like in one of the poems. um, I have her talking to her mother and asking her, is it true that you named me after a river? Right? So you immediately get into her mind, and she was named Yamuna because she was born on Yamuna Jayanti. And then afterwards, when she got married, as was the custom, the groom's family would change the name. So then her name was changed to Anandi, but she was born Yamuna, you know. And so I mean, you know, when poetry is one of those forms which you can compact experience, you can compact emotion, you can just, it's like a zoom lens. You can immediately zoom in on the voice or whatever it is that your goal is, right? So in that sense, poetry is extremely dexterous, you know, it's extremely tactile and it's extremely moldable. So I think compared to other genres, you can definitely do a lot more with poetry in some ways, especially when it comes to the emotional aspect.
I think you've done some wonderful initiatives when it comes to taking poetry beyond books and into public spaces, and just change the idea of how it enters everyday life as well. So, how was like how has that been as an effort, and in like where you are today, how do you see that developing further and others getting inspired by it?
Um, so I think a lot of times people are intimidated by poetry. I will often, you know, come across people who, when they hear I'm a poet, they'll say, "Oh, I hate poetry." You know, they have no hesitation in telling me that. You know? And you know, at first it used to shock me a little, but then I said, "Listen, what type of poetry did you read and where did you read it?" And they'll say, "Oh, it was part of school. We had to read, you know, Lord so and so's poem, you know, and it was really boring and it was really prosaic." And I said, "Okay, I understand. You know, at that time, that style was considered modern, but we're living in the 21st century. And have you read any 21st century poets?" So then they'll say, "No, I haven't," because that turned me off, right? So the thing is, like, there are so many wonderful poets that are writing about daily life, that are writing about their experience of, you know, whether they're a housewife or a mother, whether they're an engineer. Like one of my friends is a poet and she's an astrophysicist, you know, so, you know, she mixes the two, which, and along with nature, which I think is beautiful. And there are so many things you can do with poetry. You know, every topic, whether it's death, whether it's divorce, whether it's depression, whether it's the classics, whether you want to read about how Sita might have felt, whether, you know, things like that. There's a book of poems for everything. And with my work with others, what I've been able to do is hopefully give them the insight that poetry is much bigger than they thought it was. And it's much more part of their life than they thought it was. I mean, when you listen to a commercial jingle, when you see a slogan somewhere, in some form, that is poetic also, right? And that in this day and age that we're in, right, where tweets, texts, all those things, we're used to brevity, we're used to compactness. Poetry is a fantastic form. It doesn't take you hours and hours to read it. So for those reasons, I feel that poetry is probably, like, you know, one of those genres that will always carry forward, you know. You can take as much or as little from it as you want to, whereas if you're if you're reading fiction, if you're reading prose, it takes more time.
Like you said, that even in India, not everybody is aware of her story. So, how big of a task was that for you?
Uh, so yeah, definitely more work, you know, in that sphere, historically speaking. I think why I love poetry so much and why I am choosing poetry as a vehicle to look at history or look at forgotten voices is that, as I said before, right, you can really just get into the voice of it. You can really like lift up these experiences and put them on the page where immediately you can experience that visceral, you know, that visualness of it and the oral, you know, the oral quality of it. It all comes together very quickly. And the thing is, it's an alternate way of writing history. At least that's how I approach it, because history books can be very dry and they can be full of facts and dates, but you are sort of like subverting all of that when you use poetry as a form. And here in the United States, I came across like many books that were written by the, Black community here about their experiences and their struggles, and other minority communities as well, where their history is not being properly represented. Even the, the indigenous communities here, their experiences also, have been beautifully written and documented through poetry. In fact, there's a whole sphere called documentary poetry or documentary poetics, where you are, taking these historical experiences and bringing them out in poetry form. And what that does is like you can, and not just evoke the atmosphere, but you can put the language that is actually being spoken instead of trying to summarize the experience, right? You can time travel. Literally, it's almost like time traveling. You're going back and then you're bringing this person from the past and putting them into the present. So in that sense, poetry is so powerful. There's so many different ways to engage with content, right? To engage with information. This is such a fun way. I think it's just we need to break our conceptions of this is how history is taught, this is how history is learned, and so I hope that is what I'm able to achieve through poetry, or through and I won't call this just poetry. We are blending genres here. Like, this is poetry, but it's also biography, and it's also persona poetry, because in this I imbibe the voice of Anandibai Joshi, right? So we shouldn't be afraid to experiment. We shouldn't be afraid to punch through all those categories, which is what I did. I didn't have an expectation of this is what the book should do, or this is what the book will do. This is just the form which I found I could tell her story best, right? And so I didn't put that burden on myself. Yes, I did wonder, I'm not a historian, but can I write about her with historical accuracy? And in the end, I think I did. I was able to do that, right? And the reception which I received was, so wonderful. I was really pleasantly surprised by how people approach this. Some of the most moving things were when I was in India and I did a little tour with the book when it first came out. I had doctors come to me, and there was a family of 3 generations of women who were doctors. And they came to me and they said, thank you. Thank you for writing this book. And they shared their struggles, how, as women doctors, like, it was, extremely difficult, even in the 20th century, to get an education, to get respect, and so they were so grateful that I brought out the story. And even here, there were doctors who came and said, thank you so much. We didn't realize the struggle that, Anandi Bai went through in order for all of us who are now here, to connect that, for them to just make that connection was very special to them, as well as people who just, were like, wow, things have changed, but they're still the same. Because many of us South Asian women, or many of us Indian women, or women around the world, we are still struggling with some of the same issues that Anandibai went through. Yeah. So it's really interesting to see that. But I think poetry is a fantastic form to explore history, you know?
There's so much complexity to it. That's what human life is also all about. If
Absolutely.
you had one thought to give, uh, not just as motivation, but just how you feel, and if you could just, put that in better words, uh, why do we write? And what is it so enduringly human about the act of writing? How do you think, as a writer, what would your message be?
Boy, um, I think, we write in many ways. I mean, for many reasons, right? But we write to be heard, but we also write to find out something about, maybe about ourselves, maybe about humanity, right? So uh, I think the biggest thing, and for many people, the hesitation is to actually put pen to paper. So put pen to paper and see where it takes you. without any judgment. I mean, that is the only advice I can give, because we all approach writing for different reasons. But I think ultimately everyone wants to be heard, and everybody wants to share their story, and everybody wants connection. And writing does all of that.